The morning sun cast long shadows across the desert landscape as Ayana and Kaya moved silently through the rocky terrain. The Apache sisters had been tracking a wounded deer since dawn, following the blood trail that led deeper into unfamiliar territory. Their father had taught them to hunt together, to watch each other's backs. But today something felt different about the land around them. Ayana, the older sister at 19, carried their father's bow with practiced ease. Her dark eyes scanned the horizon while her younger sister Kaya, just 17, followed close behind with a leather pouch containing their precious water and dried meat. Both sisters wore traditional Apache clothing made from soft deerskin, their long black hair braided with colorful beads that caught the morning light. "The tracks lead toward the canyon," Ayana whispered, pointing to the rocky outcrop ahead. "We should be careful. This is not our hunting ground." Kaya nodded, gripping her hunting knife tighter. She had always been the more cautious of the two sisters, but hunger in their village had driven them to venture further than usual. The winter had been harsh, and game was scarce in their traditional hunting areas. Their people depended on them to bring back meat for the elders and children, as they approached the narrow canyon entrance. Both sisters felt an uneasy sensation creeping up their spines. The usual sounds of desert life seemed muted here. No birds called from the scrub brush, and even the wind seemed to whisper warnings through the red rock formations. "Something is wrong," Kaya said softly, stopping suddenly. "Listen." Ayana paused and tilted her head. The silence was too complete, too perfect. In nature, such quiet usually meant predators lurked nearby. But as they stood frozen, listening intently, a different sound reached their ears. It was the creak of leather and the soft jingle of metal buckles. "Riders," Ayana breathed. Immediately pulling her sister behind a large boulder, they pressed themselves against the rough stone, hearts pounding as the sound of horses grew louder. Through a crack in the rock, they could see 3 men on horseback approaching the canyon. These were not Apache warriors. These were white men, dressed in dusty clothes and carrying rifles across their saddles. The leader was a tall man with a scraggly beard and coal blue eyes that seemed to miss nothing as they swept the landscape. His companions looked equally rough, their faces weathered by sun and violence. All 3 men wore gun belts heavy with ammunition, and their horses bore the brands of different ranches, suggesting these might be drifters or worse. "Check them rocks," the leader called out in a harsh voice. "Saw movement this way." The sisters exchanged terrified glances. They were trapped with nowhere to run without being seen. The canyon wall rose too steeply behind them, and the only escape route would take them directly into the rider's path. "Stay quiet," Ayana mouthed to her sister, pulling an arrow from her quiver as slowly as possible. But as the men spread out to search, Kaya's foot slipped on loose gravel. The small cascade of stones seemed to echo like thunder in the stillness. All 3 riders turned toward their hiding spot immediately. Well, the leader said with a cruel smile. "Looks like we found ourselves some Apache girls." The sisters knew they had to run. Ayana grabbed Kaya's hand and they bolted from behind the boulder, racing toward a narrow trail that led up the canyon wall. Their moccasins gave them better grip on the rocky surface than the horses' hooves, and for a moment hope flickered in their hearts. Behind them, they could hear the men dismounting and giving chase on foot. The sisters knew these lands better than any white man, but they were also running uphill while their pursuers seemed fresh and determined. "This way," Ayana gasped, pulling her sister toward a cluster of juniper trees growing from the cliff face. They scrambled up the steep incline, using roots and rocks as handholds. Kaya was breathing hard, but she kept pace with her older sister. They could hear the men cursing and stumbling on the loose stones below, their heavy boots making far more noise than Apache feet would ever make as they reached the grove of trees. Ayana thought they might have a chance to hide until the men gave up, but their luck ran out when Kaya stepped wrong on what looked like solid ground. Her foot went through a carefully concealed trap, and she cried out as rope and branches snapped up around her ankle. "Ayana!" She screamed as she was jerked off her feet and hauled upward into the juniper branches. The snare had been expertly crafted. designed to catch large game like deer or elk. But it worked just as well on a 17-year-old Apache girl. Kaya found herself suspended upside down, swaying helplessly 8 feet above the ground with her ankle caught in the rope loop. Kaya! Ayana reached for her sister, but the trap had pulled her too high. Below them, they could hear the men's voices getting closer as they followed the sound of Kaya's cry. "Help me down," Kaya whispered desperately, trying to reach up and untie the rope around her ankle. But the blood rushing to her head made her dizzy, and the rope was too tight to work loose with her fingers. Ayana looked around frantically for something to cut the rope or help her reach her sister. She could climb the tree, but it would take time they didn't have. The voices of their pursuers were getting louder with each passing second. "Found 'em!" One of the men yelled from below. The 3 riders emerged into the grove, breathing hard from their climb but grinning when they saw the trapped girls. The leader looked up at Kaya swaying in the snare and laughed coldly. "Looks like someone else been hunting in these parts," he said. "Set up quite a clever trap too." "Please," Ayana said, standing protectively below her sister with her bow raised. "Let us go. We were only hunting for food for our people." "Now that's mighty interesting," the leader said, his hand resting on his gun. "But I think we got ourselves a better catch than whoever set this snare was expecting." The other 2 men spread out to surround Ayana while their leader kept his eyes on both sisters. They were clearly experienced at this sort of thing, moving with the coordination of men who had cornered prey before. "Here's what's gonna happen," the leader continued. "You're gonna put down that bow real nice and slow. Then we're gonna have ourselves a little conversation about what Apache girls might be worth to certain interested parties." Ayana's mind raced as she tried to think of options. She could try to shoot, but there were 3 of them and only 1 arrow notched. Even if she hit one, the other 2 would be on her before she could ready another shot. Above her, Kaya was growing weaker as the blood pooled in her head. "The rope is cutting off her blood," Ayana said desperately. "She needs to be cut down now or she could die." "Maybe we'll cut her down," the leader said with a shrug. "Maybe we won't. Depends on how cooperative you decide to be." That was when they all heard it. The sound of a single horse approaching at a steady pace, its rider making no attempt at stealth. All heads turned toward the sound as a new voice called out from the canyon below. "Afternoon, gentlemen. Seems like you found my snare." A lone cowboy emerged into view, sitting easy in his saddle on a paint horse. He was younger than the 3 men, maybe 25, with sun-bleached brown hair and calm green eyes that seemed to take in the whole situation at a glance. He wore simple range clothes and carried a Colt revolver on his hip, but his posture suggested he wasn't particularly worried about being outnumbered 3 to 1. "Your snare?" The leader of the 3 said suspiciously. "Set it yesterday morning," the cowboy replied, dismounting slowly. "Been tracking that wounded deer for 2 days. Figured he might come this way to water." He looked up at Kaya hanging in the tree and frowned. "Though I sure wasn't expecting to catch anything like that." "Well, you can just ride on, cowboy," the leader said, his hand moving closer to his gun. "We got here first, so this here's our find." The cowboy studied the 3 men for a long moment, then looked at Ayana standing with her bow drawn and finally up at Kaya swaying weakly in the snare. When he spoke again, his voice had taken on a harder edge. "Funny thing about that," he said quietly. "See, I know every rancher and honest rider within 50 miles of here. Don't recognize any of you boys, which makes me wonder what you're really doing in my hunting grounds." The tension in the grove became thick enough to cut with a knife. The 3 men were clearly considering whether to draw their guns, while Ayana tried to decide if this new arrival was a threat or potential ally. Above them all, Kaya's strength was fading fast as the rope continued to cut off circulation to her foot. "Now, here's what I think happened," the cowboy continued, his hand casually resting near his gun. "You boys were following these girls with less than honorable intentions. Then the younger one got caught in my snare, and now you think you got yourselves an easy opportunity. You calling us kidnappers, boy?" The leader snarled. "I'm calling it like I see it," the cowboy replied calmly. "And what I see is 2 Apache girls who need help, 3 men who look like trouble, and a situation that needs settling. The standoff stretched for several heartbeats. Then the cowboy's expression hardened even more. "But before we settle anything," he said, looking directly at Ayanna, "I got my own terms for getting your sister down from there." The words hit Ayanna like a physical blow. She had hoped the cowboy might be different from the three men who had been pursuing them, but now it seemed he had his own agenda. Above her, Kaya's breathing was becoming labored as the rope continued to restrict blood flow to her leg. "What kind of terms?" Ayanna asked, her voice steady despite the fear churning in her stomach. The cowboy's green eyes moved between her and the three men, calculating something she couldn't read. "First things first," he said. "You three need to back away from the lady." "Right now?" "Like hell we will," the leader of the three growled. "We found them fair and square. Did you now?" the cowboy asked, his voice deceptively casual. "Because from where I sit, it looks like you were chasing two young women through terrain they obviously know better than you do. Makes a man wonder why they were running." One of the other men, a stocky fellow with nervous eyes, shifted uncomfortably. "We weren't doing nothing wrong, mister. Just came across them is all." "Hung," the cowboy said. "And I suppose you just happened to be carrying those ropes and leg irons for no particular reason?" Ayanna's eyes widened as she noticed for the first time that one of the men indeed had shackles hanging from his saddle. These weren't just drifters or even cattle thieves. They were slavers, probably planning to sell Apache captives to work camps or worse. "Now you listen here, boy," the leader said, his hand hovering over his gun. "You can ride away and pretend you never saw nothing, or you can join these girls in whatever's coming to them. Your choice." The cowboy smiled, but it wasn't a friendly expression. "Actually, I think I'll choose option 3. His hand moved to his gun with practiced speed, but instead of drawing, he simply rested it there in clear warning. "See, I got a real problem with men who make their living off other people's misery. And an even bigger problem with anyone who'd hurt women who can't properly defend themselves." "She's got a bow," the nervous man pointed out. "One arrow against 3 guns, the cowboy said. "Hardly what I'd call fair odds." Above them, Kaya made a small sound of distress. The blood rushing to her head was making her sick and dizzy, and she was starting to lose feeling in her trapped foot. "Please," Ayanna said urgently. "My sister needs help now? Whatever you want from us, I'll listen. Just get her down first." The cowboy looked up at Kaya, and his expression softened slightly. "All right. But my terms stand? You 3, he said to the slavers, "are going to mount up and ride out now, before I decide to make this a permanent solution instead of a temporary one. And if we don't?" the leader challenged. "Then we find out how fast you can draw," the cowboy replied simply, the tension stretched taut as a bowstring. All 3 men were armed, but there was something about the cowboy's calm confidence that made them hesitate. He didn't seem worried about the odds, which suggested he was either very good with that gun or very stupid. "This ain't over, cowboy," the leader finally said. "We'll remember you." "I'm sure you will," the cowboy replied. "Name's Jake Carson, by the way, in case you want to look me up sometime." The 3 men exchanged glances, clearly recognizing the name. Whatever reputation Jake Carson carried, it was enough to make them reconsider their position. Slowly, reluctantly, they began backing toward their horses. "This is a mistake," the leader said as he mounted. "Should have taken our deal." "Probably," Jake agreed. "But I never was much good at taking the easy path." The 3 slavers rode away, but not before the leader turned back with a final threat. "We know where Apache camps are, Carson. Might be we'll pay them a visit soon. Might be you'll find them better defended than you think," Jake replied evenly, once the sound of hoofbeats faded. Jake turned his attention to the trapped girl in the tree, but instead of immediately moving to help, he looked at Ayanna with those calculating green eyes. "Now about those terms I mentioned," he said. Ayanna felt her heart sink. "What do you want?" "Information," Jake said simply. "See, I've been tracking those 3 for near on a month now. They've taken at least 6 Apache women and children from camps along the border, selling them to work camps in Mexico where nobody asks questions about papers or freedom." Ayanna's blood went cold. Her own cousin had disappeared 3 months ago while gathering herbs near their village. The family had assumed she'd been taken by animals or gotten lost, but now a more sinister possibility emerged. "You want me to help you track them?" she said, understanding beginning to dawn. "I want you to help me stop them," Jake corrected. "Permanently." Above them, Kaya was growing weaker by the minute. Ayana could see her sister's face turning pale as the blood pooled in her head. "Kaya first," she said firmly. "Then we talk." Jake nodded and began climbing the juniper tree with practiced ease. He pulled a sharp knife from his boot and carefully cut through the rope holding Kaya's ankle. As she fell, he caught her and lowered her gently to the ground, where Ayana immediately began checking her for injuries. "Is she hurt bad?" Jake asked. Kneeling beside them, Kaya was conscious but groggy. Her ankle was bruised and swollen where the rope had cut into it, but she could move her toes and there seemed to be no permanent damage. "She needs rest and water," Ayana said, "and time for the blood to flow properly again." Jake nodded and fetched his canteen from his saddle. "Take what you need. I've got more." As Kaya slowly recovered, Ayana studied this strange cowboy who had driven off their attackers. He seemed genuinely concerned about her sister's welfare, but she had learned long ago that white men's kindness often came with prices that were too high to pay. "Why should I trust you?" she asked bluntly. Jake considered the question seriously. "Because I'm asking for your help, not demanding it. Because I gave you water without asking for payment. And because if I wanted to hurt you, I could have just let those three have their way. But you still want something from me." "I do," he admitted. "Those men have taken people from your tribe." "Maybe people you know?" "I can track them, but I can't get inside Apache camps to learn where they might strike next. And I sure can't fight them and a dozen others like them all by myself." Kaya was sitting up now, taking small sips of water and testing her injured ankle. She looked at her sister with eyes that held both gratitude and worry. "The man with the beard," she said softly. "I've seen him before. Near our village, watching from the hills." Ayana felt a chill run down her spine. "When?" "2 days ago." "Maybe 3. I was with grandmother gathering sage when I saw him on the ridge." Jake leaned forward intently. "Did he see you see him?" "I don't think so," Kaya said. "I pretended not to notice and told grandmother we should go home." "Smart girl," Jake said approvingly. "But it means they're planning something soon. Probably tomorrow night, maybe the night after." Ayana felt the weight of decision pressing down on her. Her people had always been suspicious of white men, and with good reason. Too many promises had been broken, too many treaties ignored. But this man had saved them when he could have just ridden away. "What exactly are you asking me to do?" she said. "Help me get into your camp," Jake said. "Let me talk to your war chief. Convince him that I'm not just another white man looking to cheat the Apache. And then we set a trap of our own. Let those slavers come, but be ready for them. Turn hunters into the hunted." Kaya struggled to her feet, testing her weight on the injured ankle. "He saved us, sister. And if what he says is true about our cousin..." Ayana knew her sister was right, but fear and generations of distrust made it hard to accept help from this stranger. Yet what choice did they have? The slavers knew where their village was, and they would be back with more men. "If I agree," she said slowly, "how do I know you won't betray us to soldiers or bounty hunters?" Jake was quiet for a long moment, then he did something that surprised her completely. He pulled his gun from its holster and held it out to her, but first, "Because I'm giving you this," he said. "If I try to betray you or your people, you can shoot me with my own gun." Ayana stared at the offered weapon. No white man had ever voluntarily given her a gun. The gesture was so unexpected that she almost didn't know how to respond. "I don't know how to use it," she admitted. "I'll teach you," Jake said simply. "Along with your sister, she wants to learn. Might come in handy when those slavers come back." Kaya limped over to them, her face set with determination despite her injury. "Sister, we have to try. If they take more of our people..." Ayana looked at her younger sister, then at the strange cowboy who was still holding out his gun. Everything about this situation went against Apache tradition and common sense. But sometimes she realized survival meant taking risks that would have seemed impossible under normal circumstances. "There are conditions," she said finally. "Name them," Jake replied. "You come to our camp as my captive, not as a guest. That way, if the elders don't trust you, they can decide what to do without feeling obligated by hospitality laws." Jake considered this and nodded. "Fair enough. What else?" "You teach both my sister and me to use guns. And you help us track our missing cousin if she's still alive." "Done and done," Jake said without hesitation. Ayanna took the gun from his hands, surprised by how heavy it felt. The metal was warm from being carried next to his body, and she could smell gun oil and leather polish. "One more thing," she said, looking him straight in the eye. The Apache village sat in a natural bowl between red rock cliffs, hidden from casual view by careful placement and generations of wisdom. As the sun set behind the western peaks, cooking fires began to twinkle like earthbound stars throughout the camp. Children played between the wickiups, while women prepared the evening meal and men tended to horses and weapons. The arrival of Ayanna and Kaya, with a bound white man, created an immediate stir. Warriors emerged from their homes with weapons ready while women gathered their children close. The sisters had tied Jake's hands with rope from his own saddle, and Ayanna walked ahead leading his horse as if he were indeed her prisoner. "Ayanna," called an older warrior named Hawkfeather, striding toward them with his rifle held ready. "What is this? Where have you been?" "We were hunting when slavers cornered us," Ayanna replied loudly enough for the gathering crowd to hear. "This white man helped us escape, but he says he has information about the men who take our people." An elderly woman with silver-streaked hair pushed through the crowd. This was Grandmother Singing Bird, the wisest of the tribal elders and a woman whose word carried enormous weight in all council decisions. "Bring him to the council fire," she said after studying Jake's face intently. "We will hear what he has to say." Jake was surprised by the dignity with which he was treated, even as a supposed captive. No one struck him or spat at him, though many watched with understandable suspicion. The Apache had learned bitter lessons about trusting white men over the years. The council fire blazed high in the center of the village as the tribal leaders gathered. War Chief Standing Bear, a man of perhaps 40 years with scars from many battles, sat across from Jake with arms folded. Medicine Man Wise Owl took his place to the chief's right, while Grandmother Singing Bird sat to his left. "Speak," Standing Bear commanded. "Tell us why we should not kill you for being in our hunting grounds with weapons." Jake looked around the circle of faces in the firelight. Some showed curiosity, others suspicion, and a few barely contained hostility. He knew he had one chance to convince them, and the lives of many people might depend on his words. 3 days ago, I was tracking slave hunters who have been raiding Apache camps," he began. "Today I found them cornering these 2 women in a canyon trap. I know where their main camp is, how many men they have, and when they plan to attack this village." A murmur ran through the assembled people. Standing Bear held up a hand for silence. Why would a white man hunt other white men? The war chief asked. Jake met his gaze steadily. "Because my sister was taken by slavers 5 years ago. Sold to a work camp in Mexico where she died before I could find her. I've been hunting these men ever since." The honesty in his voice carried across the council circle. Several of the elders exchanged glances, recognizing the pain of loss that transcended racial boundaries. Grandmother Singing Bird leaned forward. "You seek revenge?" "I seek justice," Jake corrected. "And to stop them from taking anyone else's family? What do you know of our missing people?" Medicine Man Wise Owl asked. Jake took a deep breath. 6 people taken in the last 2 months. 3 women, 2 children, and 1 teenage boy. They're being held at a camp about 20 miles south of here, near the old Spanish mission ruins. The effect of his words was immediate. Several women in the crowd gasped, and one began to cry softly. These weren't just numbers to them, they were daughters, sisters, children. "My cousin," Ayanna said quietly. "Star that dances. She disappeared 3 months ago." Jake nodded grimly. "Brown hair, about 16 years old?" Scar on her left hand from a cooking accident? Ayana's eyes filled with tears. You've seen her? She's alive, Jake said. Scared and thin, but alive. They keep the captives in an old root cellar behind the mission. Standing Bear studied Jake's face in the dancing firelight. How do we know this is not a trap? How do we know you are not leading us into an ambush? Because I'm asking you to capture me first, Jake replied, surprising everyone. Take me prisoner for real if you want. Send scouts to confirm what I've told you about their camp. When you see I'm telling the truth, then decide if you want my help. Kaya, who had been sitting quietly beside her sister, suddenly spoke up. He gave us his gun. A white man gave Apache women his only weapon. She pulled Jake's Colt from where she had hidden it in her clothing and held it up for all to see. The council members stared in amazement. Such a gesture was almost unthinkable. He also taught us how to use it, Ayana added. He kept his word about everything. Grandmother Singing Bird rose and walked slowly around the fire to stand directly in front of Jake. She studied his face for a long moment, then reached out and placed her weathered hand on his forehead. I see truth in your eyes, she said finally, and great sorrow. You have lost much, as have we. She turned to address the council. I say we send scouts to verify his words. If they are true, we listen to his plan, and if they are false? Standing Bear asked. Then we feed him to the coyotes, Grandmother Singing Bird replied factly. 2 hours later, 3 Apache scouts returned from their reconnaissance mission. Their leader, a young warrior named Swift Arrow, reported to the council with grim efficiency. Everything he said is true, Swift Arrow announced. 15 men in camp, 6 prisoners in a root cellar. They have guards posted, but they do not know our land well. Standing Bear turned back to Jake. Now we listen to your plan, white man. But know this, if any of our people are harmed because of your counsel, you will die slowly. Jake nodded his understanding. The slavers plan to attack tomorrow night during the new moon. They think darkness will help them capture more people without being seen. How many men do they have total? Standing Bear asked. 32 that I've counted, but only half are experienced fighters. The rest are just thugs looking for easy money. Medicine Man Wise Owl frowned. We have 20 warriors. Even with surprise, the numbers are against us. Not if we split them up, Jake said. Here's what I'm thinking. We let them come to the village, but we're ready for them. Most of our warriors hide in positions around the camp. Meanwhile, a small group attacks their main camp to free the prisoners. They will have guards at their camp? Swift Arrow pointed out. Only 3 men, Jake replied. The rest will be here trying to capture new prisoners. We hit their camp while they're distracted. Ayana had been listening intently to the discussion. I want to go with the group that attacks their camp, she said. Absolutely not, Standing Bear said immediately. This is men's work. With respect, War Chief, it was women's work when they captured our cousin, Ayana replied firmly. And I know that camp area better than any of your warriors. My sister and I used to gather herbs near those ruins. Grandmother Singing Bird smiled approvingly. The girl speaks wisdom. Sometimes the best warriors are those who fight for family. The debate continued for another hour as the plan was refined and improved. Jake's knowledge of the slavers' methods combined with Apache tactical expertise and intimate knowledge of the local terrain. By the time the council fire had burned low, they had developed a strategy that just might work. One more thing, Jake said as the meeting prepared to break up. When this is over, I ride away. I don't want thanks or payment. I just want those men stopped. Standing Bear studied him for a moment, then nodded slowly. You are a strange white man, Jake Carson. But perhaps that is why you might succeed where others have failed. The next evening, as predicted, the slavers crept toward the Apache village under cover of darkness. They moved in a loose line, confident that they were dealing with unsuspecting victims. What they found instead was the fight of their lives. The Apache warriors were positioned perfectly. Having spent the day preparing ambush positions based on Jake's intelligence about how the slavers typically operated, as the attackers moved into the village perimeter, they found themselves caught in a deadly crossfire. Meanwhile, Jake led a small group including Ayana, Swift Arrow, and two other warriors toward the slaver camp near the old mission. They approached from the east, using a dry creek bed for concealment as they got within striking distance of the guards. "Remember," Jake whispered as they prepared to attack, "we need at least one alive to tell us if there are other camps." The assault on the slaver camp was swift and brutal. The three guards were overwhelmed before they could raise an alarm, and within minutes Jake was pulling open the heavy wooden door of the root cellar where the prisoners were held. "Star that dances?" Ayana called softly into the darkness. A familiar voice answered from the depths of the cellar. "Ayana, is that really you?" Tears streaming down her face, Ayana helped her cousin up from the underground prison. Star that dances was thin and weak, but alive and unbroken in spirit. The other prisoners, two women with their children and a teenage boy, were in similar condition. "Can you travel?" Jake asked the freed captives. "We can do whatever we must to get away from here." Star that dances replied firmly. The journey back to the village took most of the night, as they had to move carefully with the weakened prisoners. When they finally arrived at dawn, they found the Apache warriors celebrating a complete victory. All but 3 of the slavers had been killed or captured, and those 3 had fled into the desert where they would likely die of thirst before reaching help.